Hi, I'm Amanda Lannert with Jellyvision, here with a series of speakers, experts, in fact, to talk about what's next with work, reimagining productivity, leadership, collaboration, and culture building in a post-COVID world. I have Margaret Mueller, President and CEO of the Executives Club, and I can't wait to hear about how an event-based business is thriving in a world where you can't have an events with more than 10 people. Allison Joseph, who's the VP of Employee Digital Experience at Fidelity Investments. We know Allison. And last but not least, we pulled from one of our own, a 12-year veteran of Jellyvision, our Chief Operating Officer, Brynn Michelich. Thank you, everybody, so much for joining. I'd love to just start off and have each of you give a little blurb about what you do for a living, and then tell us what is your experience with remote work, just to set context about how you're going to be answering. Are you new to this, old pro, been back and forth? Like, just let us know sort of your sort of, war stripes when it comes to not being in an office 24/7 looking at other people. Let's start with Brynn.
Yeah, so I run operations at Jellyvision. So I'm responsible for the teams that get our product out to our customers, and then for some of the operations of our actual office environment. So when we're talking about remote work and how I'm involved, there's kind of two things to think about. One is I'm responsible for the team that manages our office spaces. So I'm very deeply involved in figuring out how that will work and what that's going to look like going forward in the future. And then the second thing is, as Amanda mentioned, I've been at Jellyvision for 12 years, but I've actually been a remote employee for 5 of those 12 years. So I personally am very comfortable and aware of what it's like to be a remote employee. So it's about managing the organization and teaching it how to do the things that I've been practicing.
Margaret.
Hi. So for the last 18 months, I've been the CEO of the Executives Club of Chicago. Before that, I was the president of a market research and customer insights firm. So ever since I had kids 5 years ago, I have been working from home at least one day a week, hit or miss. I was trying to commit to it, and sometimes it would be better than not. And I feel like I'm finally getting everything I said I wanted, which is interesting. I wanted more flexibility. I didn't want to have to commute in every day. But I wanted to be able to engage with my team. And I always felt like as the CEO, I needed to set a good example, and it wasn't good for me to be the one out of the office when I was expecting my team to be there. So this has been a really interesting gift. In my company, we only have 15 employees, but I'll be able to offer a lot of perspective of what I'm hearing from our board of directors and a lot of Chicago CEOs, because we've been covering these topics a lot the last few months. So I'll just be pulling in what I'm hearing from a lot of Chicago companies.
Awesome, thank you. And last but not least, Allison.
Hi, so I am responsible at Fidelity for our Net Benefits homepage, and Net Benefits is the site that our clients' employees use to interact with their benefits. So my experience at Fidelity, so the whole time I've worked at Fidelity, the last 8 years, I've been remote. Fidelity is based in Boston, and I lived in Chicago and now Detroit. So, but my prior employer for 15 years, I went to the office pretty much every day. So when I was there, I was just dying to have a day here and there to work from home. And now that I'm 100% remote, I really look forward to those times that I can travel to the offices and be with people, which now I can't. But so a pretty good mix of both remote and in the office every day working.
So I'd love to start just talking about, of all the lessons of being home for probably close to 100 days, which is where we are in the grand scheme of the pandemic, what's one thing each of you has learned that has surprised you the most as a leader or as a human being, or ideally as both of them at the same time? Let's start with Margaret. And I know we're members, and one of the things I think about is you spend a lot of time getting people into a room, and a lot of it is the community or events. What has surprised you about a world where you cannot gather with more than 10 people, at least in the state of Illinois at this point?
So I'll give a personal one and a work one. Personally, I cannot believe how much of a closet introvert I am. I mean, you know me a bit. I think of myself as a huge extrovert, and I thought I was going to miss going out to eat and all the events, and I can't believe how much I don't miss it, which is very strange for me. Like I think of myself as out and about. So that's been interesting. From a business perspective, our engagement in our events is, for some events, even higher than we had when it was in person, but for the most part on par, because we've now broken down a lot of barriers to getting to in-person events during the week. For our suburban members, it's tough for them to get downtown to a hotel, have lunch, all of that. But to be able to log on for an hour is really great. And they can chat with people and still stay connected. And then also from a speaker perspective, it's such an easier lift. So we're getting really quickly amazing CEOs who are very happy to speak because they don't have to get on a plane, fly to Chicago, stay in a hotel, do all of that. They'll just log in for an hour. So it's been going pretty well. My sense is that if this goes on for about 12 or 18 months, people are very happy to come along this journey with us. If this is really a new way of operating and we are not convening in groups more than 50, then we really have to change our business model. I'm not sure what an events-based business looks like. But for the short term, I'd say 12 to 18 months, we're okay. We're executing pretty well.
Thank you for that candor. That's really interesting perspective. Let's go to Brynn. What have you learned as someone who's used to watching people in Zoom rooms, talk in faces and you stare at the back of your heads? What's been the big takeaway for you?
Yeah, similar to the engagement piece that you were just talking about, we have seen much better engagement scores on our big group meetings. And I think it's because everyone is viewing and experiencing the content in the same way. So often if you were remote before or just working from home for the day, it's a subpar experience because you can't hear the speaker very well and you can't really see the screen. And now that everybody is experiencing the same thing and we're all staring at the same, presentation or whatever it is, it's actually keeping people more engaged and more into it. For me personally, since you did the professional and the personal one, it's been interesting to me to learn how asynchronous I can be with my job because I have 2 small kids at home, and it's like you got to kind of just do an hour of this and then an hour of that and just sort of juggle it.
And then Allison, when I think about Fidelity, there are people who are all in one room, and then there are also an awful lot of remote employees. How has it shifted with everyone being at home, and what's the lesson there? And what lessons do you think you'll keep with you when people are allowed to start leaving the houses and go back to work?
Yeah, so it's been really interesting because what I think has happened is it has sort of leveled the playing field. So I'll give you an example of a meeting we had before COVID was a part of our vocabulary. We had my whole team that's in the US together in Raleigh, but I also have a smaller portion of my team that's in Halifax, and we couldn't get them down for the meeting. And we learned a lot in that meeting about how hard that was for the team in Halifax to have everybody together but them. They were together in Halifax. But some of the things, Brynn, you were saying, it makes it really hard when you have this huge group in one room and then kind of a satellite group in another room for people to track. And, people get excited and they start talking at the same time, and then you can't hear what anyone's talking about. So it's definitely leveled the playing field to have everybody individually in their own space. And people just being sort of more cognizant of, pulling people in that you haven't heard from and things like that. I think we're going to have to really focus on what do we do when the offices do start opening back up and people do go to work, to make sure that we're not sort of isolating people accidentally when we have bigger groups sort of together and other groups not with everyone. And then just personally, I was just kind of surprised as someone who's been working remotely for 8 years that this actually feels weird. Like I thought, I've been doing this the whole time. What's the big deal? But it does feel weird anyway. Like just, I think not being able to travel to go and visit my team whenever I want to has been definitely an adjustment that I didn't realize, like how big of a part of my working with them that was.
Can I add to that, Allison? Because someone said something to me a couple of weeks ago that was this huge light bulb moment. They said, we're not working from home. We are sheltering in place during a global pandemic and trying to work. There is a distinction. And I was like, oh my gosh, right.
Yeah.
Like if we were to try to work from home, it wouldn't be like this, right? We would be doing things very differently. And I don't know why it didn't occur to me, but once he said it, I was like, oh yeah. So it sounds like that's kind of what you're talking about.
Yeah.
This is different than working from home.
I've noticed there's almost like a social pact for people using Zoom where you're nodding at the camera. There's a lot more sort of like subtle body cues to say I'm here and I'm listening that you don't get when you're presenting in a room full, of hundreds of people, where I actually like it better. But I'm wondering if there's like all or nothing. If everyone's remote, Zoom is great. If everyone's in a room, in-person meetings are great. But what are there going to be the rules of engagement? Anyone have if you had to write the playbook on how to work when you're allowed to leave your houses, would it be, we're going to enter an era of meetings where everyone always has their laptop and they're always looking at their laptop camera, even if they're sitting in a room with 8 people? Or what is it? We're going to go back to what it was. What, if you had to write the playbook, what suggestions would you make to make work when we're not all in our basement?
So I think for us, we're approaching it as thinking through, how do you create a equal experience for everybody? So it might be, for example, that the presenter needs to put their camera on and are also presenting to people that are on Zoom, for example. And then making sure that audio is improved, microphones in the room are improved, all that kind of stuff. Because I believe that even when we can go back into the office and it's safe, we have created a culture shift where people are going to continue to work from home more often than they were before, regardless of what the role is, as long as their role allows it. So we're going to have to accommodate, even more than before, people in 2 different places. So we really have to think through how you literally sit in a meeting and you're thinking about the people that are on video as well, and make sure that you've invested appropriately in your conference rooms and in your video software to make that better for them.
Yeah, Amanda, you were at our very last in-person event. You moderated that program with Chicago's tech leaders. It was on March 5th. And some people thought this whole thing was a joke. People were blatantly hugging and kissing just to show I'm not afraid. And then other people were taking it seriously. And I don't know that either one of us could have ever predicted on March 5th.
I will say the processional into the luncheon involved getting in a line and stopping by and getting pumps of hand sanitizer. So there was some level of gravity that literally everyone stopped and went past the sanitation station. So we had some sense of it coming, but please, I do remember the event.
What we're thinking about, because we do envision that we're going to go back to a hybrid model for events. So even when we enter phase 4, we can envision having 50 people in a room, and maybe it's our board and sponsors, and we do a lottery for individual ticket buyers and something, but then the rest of the audience is online. And I think we haven't figured it all out yet, but I think the talent, so to speak, so similar to what Brynn said, is going to have to be camera like this, so that the virtual people don't lose the experience. And that's just going to be weird. I don't know how we're going to do that. So what we've said is the fireside chats will do first hybrid, but the panels are just going to be all virtual until there is a vaccine or something. I just don't see a hybrid model with a panel. It would be so weird. How do you hook everyone up? I'm just not sure.
Now, we've already heard sort of I thought I was an extrovert, but I'm an introvert. And I really wonder if permanently remote work is the spiritual death of extroverts. And so I'm going to kind of go along this line. One of the things I have missed the most is water cooler talk, where I run into and have spontaneous low pressure conversations with people I don't work with day in and day out, where I learn about the business, I learn about these humans. It's amazing. When we're all remote, I haven't found an organic way to bump into people. And I'll be honest, I hear about virtual networking rooms, and I'm just oh, that sounds awful. How are people creating moments of organic conversation? Or is, in fact, it isn't organic, it's planned and structured, and you don't use meetings, but you use different formats? How are people staying in touch? Allison, you can't get on a plane. How are you building relationships and finding moments of humanity when you used to jump on a plane all the time? Can you give us some tips or any ways to build human connections when you can't leave your house?
Yeah, sure. So it feels a little less organic or sort of forced at first in my experience, but then it kind of opens up. So what we've done is schedule a weekly 30-minute hangout. So the whole team just gets on Zoom, and the rule is no work talk. And we usually have a question of the week that someone will think of a question and then they'll pose it to everyone, and that sort of gets the conversation going. And every time I learn something new about someone I've had on my team for over a year now, And it's actually been really good. Like I said, at first it felt sort of weird and forced, but I feel like the team sort of looks forward to it now because it's like a nice little respite in the middle of the week. And then once a month we try to do a virtual happy hour. So I think that's been helping us quite a bit.
Can we hear examples of some of the questions you ask?
Yes.
Most embarrassing childhood moment, or are they like really heady, thoughtful? Like what are some examples of questions that have been awesome icebreakers?
So we've done a little bit of both, but like, for example, one was, what's the dumbest thing you've ever done? Like, so that kind of got people sharing personal stuff that was, a lot of it was funny. Sometimes like one question we asked was, what's your most prized possession? Like, what's the one thing you have that, if your house is on fire, what are you going to take with you? So, things like that, all different levels of questions. We end up talking a lot about what everyone's watching and reading too, because we got to a point where everyone sort of ran out of whatever show they had been binging, and so we shared a lot of that.
Awesome. I might copy that. Those are really good ideas. Brynn, you know everyone, you know what's up with everyone. How on earth do you do it?
Yeah, we use Slack as our instant messaging system, and most folks are actually really great about updating their status as to what's going on. Are they available? Are they not available? Are they in a meeting? And I started to adapt this thing that a lot of the managers on my team have been using, which is I just sort of pay attention during the day to who's doing what. And then I've started, for example, one of our product managers is on a really wacky schedule, and she starts working at 5 a.m. and because she's got childcare that she's juggling, and so I know that, and I typically start working at around 6 a.m. because I'm Eastern time. So I just Slack her first thing in the morning, and we have like a little coffee chat. Or folks that like tend to kind of burn it later in the day or lunchtime or whatever. And so that's how I try to create something that's a little bit more organic, but it feels like water cooler chat because it's not like meeting at the exact same time. It's just sending somebody a note when like, hey, you killed it in that meeting, or I had a follow-up question I didn't want to have for the group, or like, hey, I know you're working because it's a crazy time, like how you doing, that kind of stuff. So it's not, foolproof because you have to really like be paying attention and they have to be available or not available. But I think it's helped make people feel like you can see them even if you can't see them.
Great use of Slack. And then Margaret, let's talk about these networking groups. It's one thing to work a room. How do you work a chat room? How have you set that up so that people, have good conversations when we're all little Brady Bunch squares on a screen?
So the Zoom breakout function has been amazing. The ability to break people up, and then we do kind of like a hot potato thing where we have it all pre-scheduled and then people get mixed up. So then you get into a new room with some new people. So we had a big strategic planning session. It was an all-day session, and we had it on the books from a few months ago. We knew that after the board meeting we were going to do it. And we thought, how in the world are we going to do this virtually? Should we just keep putting it on hold? And we did it. And it worked really well with these breakouts. And so we had different departments and we mixed them up. So this department would meet with this department for an hour in a breakout room. And then we gave people breaks in the day to do their personal things and come back. And it kept it really engaging. And it's got to be better. I mean, the whiteboarding is not great. I know the collaboration tools, the video and breakout is good, but other than that, the true collaboration is not good. And I have not found a great tool yet. If one of you has one.
So if you're not using tools, is it just communication? How are you encouraging collaboration?
Well, so people will do a share screen and they'll own the keeping of the notes and stuff, but it's just not great.
Awesome. Let's talk about some more leadership aspects. Let's talk about communication. When it's not water cooler, when there aren't signs posted in the kitchen that, you have a chance of having people see, how should communication to the company, the cadence, the format, modalities change when everyone's not in the same room? And I understand there's sort of like heightened communication now because we're in a global pandemic. But if you take away that sort of stressor and just really think about remote, not in the same room, potentially working asynchronously, Brynn, what have you learned about how to communicate effectively and keep people aligned when we're all over?
Yeah, I think more written communication has been something we found very effective. And I know that's one of the things that Amazon talks a lot about with their culture, because then people can reference it when they're working if it's a strange time, or at least if they missed the meeting, it's a much easier way for them to kind of digest the information. The other thing there is if you use something like the Google Suite where you can kind of add live comments into it, it ends up actually kind of being a debate and a back and forth that you can have as you're trying to craft something. So it's really important for us that we focus on things being written down, so that anyone can see them when they need to. And that helps us with that transparency. I also, Amanda, to your point, very much agree that because of the pandemic, more communication more often in whatever format makes sense is really important, because you got to be checking in on people because you can't see how they're doing, and you got to make them feel a little bit safer and more comfortable in what's going on.
That's good. Allison, sort of following that, how does the role of managers change? How should it change when you have a largely distributed team?
Yeah, I think there's a few things. I think it takes being sort of more intentional and better at facilitating, whether it's a meeting or, whatever it is. But so I think that's one thing. And it goes back to what I was saying before about how when you have one group in one room and another group separate, and I think it just takes sort of more active pulling people out, calling on people when you haven't heard from them in a while. Just sort of like good old fashioned facilitation that I think I myself, I've sort of gotten out of practice with. I think it also takes a lot, like, especially right now, acknowledging that people are at home and they may not have a separate space and they may have kids running around them and they may have pets. And, I think the line between work and your outside life has just been sort of obliterated. So just acknowledging that and giving people space and grace. And, I really loved when this all started. Our CEO came out almost immediately with a video and talked about how, because we can be pretty conservative at Fidelity. I don't think that's any secret. And she just said, we need to cut each other some slack. You're going to see kids running behind people in Zooms and you're going to hear dogs barking, and that's just going to be the way it is. And so let's just cut each other some slack. So I think just kind of acknowledging people sort of being a person first and a manager second, and just acknowledging all of that.
I do think that one of the weird things that surprised me about COVID, and especially since we're all virtual, is that more often than not, when we're on Zoom calls, even with people who are outside of Jellyvision, and the question starts, how are you doing? People are answering honestly. I think you hit on something that's really important. And let's get specific. Zoom burnout is real.
Yes.
The anxiety of a global pandemic and the economic impact, 70% of Americans are financially impacted by COVID at this point. Now, there's a lot of stress going on, both in short-term, long-term. Short-term, how should companies be responding to help employees while we're still all, fighting for survival? It can't be just don't work. Most companies can't afford to just say, just don't work until we come back. But how do you take care of, how do you acknowledge the mental health, challenges of living in a pandemic? And then longer term, how should companies be evolving benefits to really support remote workers? Should we start investing in everyone gets a Zoom light and mics are everywhere, or stipends for improving your home? Really short term, how do we as companies take care of our people? And long term, how do we start to evolve our benefit strategies if in fact we don't go back to office work en masse? Anyone who wants to jump in.
So I think we had this 1-2 punch of COVID, but then also the death of George Floyd, which was incredibly emotional. And I feel like companies were attuned to their employees' health and well-being, but then after George Floyd, were really attuned to it, because people were then saying, I am not okay. And we had people just opting out of meetings those first few days saying, I just can't, I need some time. And we didn't have that during the pandemic, but we had it then. And so it's been somewhat recent where this has been now very present on our minds, that maybe we didn't really know how well people were doing. They were telling us that they were okay, but deep down maybe weren't. And so we started doing some pulse surveys. And so they're anonymous, check-ins. How are you actually feeling? And then we signed on with Chill and got everyone the app. And so they can do some meditation. We did a session. They came and did a session with us. But I think it's not one size fits all. And that's what's so challenging, right? So Brynn already talked about people have got a whole lot of stuff going on. So some people need to work early in the mornings and log off. Some people need to work later. Some people need to check out in the middle of the day. Some people, people are needing all different things in this environment. So it's not like you can just have a corporate plan. Here are the things we're going to do. I feel like there's going to have to be a lot of individualization and flexibility in this, and that's going to be challenging to figure out.
Yeah, we have a mental health sort of partner that we use at Fidelity. Lyra is the name of it, and there's an app. And some of the benefits changes that happened were, I think they just kind of reminded us of that. I can't remember if that existed before or not, but I think you can get like 12 free sessions, someone to talk to, whether you do it via text or video or a phone call. There's all sorts of options for that. And then another thing that changed was these sort of 5 extra days of just kind of mental health time. So, extra time to take off if you are having a rough day. I know a few people that I work with, that week after George Floyd was murdered was especially hard. And, people took advantage of those days for sure. And I think they will continue to. And our leadership has also just flat out said, please use your vacation days. That's what they're there for. And we know people need them now more than ever. So I think the sort of support and permission from that level was really great to hear too. I don't think it was ever any different in the past, but just saying it outright to everyone, I think really made a big difference.
Those are all great suggestions. Let's kind of get a little bit more quanty about it and saying when people, we can't do a drive-by, when you aren't seeing people in meetings and kind of reading body language, how do you track morale? Brynn, do you want to talk about some of the things we're doing in terms of surveys and just like manager check-ins? Like how do you measure morale and keep an eye on people when you can't literally keep an eye on people?
Yeah. I resonate with everything that all of you are saying. One of the things that we have charged a lot of our managers with is actually looking at what PTO people are taking, not because we're trying to police it in a negative way, but actually to say, like, you need to take some time off. Because what we've really experienced is there's, a lot of people had spring break plans that got canceled, and everyone's just sort of kicking their vacations in the hopes that maybe they'll be able to do them later. And I had a specific conversation with an employee last week where they said, I don't feel like I should take a day off because I'm just stuck at home. So why? And it's like, no, that's exactly why you should take time off and not just kick it to later in the year. You really have to kind of keep pace on that. So we're tracking how people are doing with that to make sure that they're having that space. And then also we're doing a lot of both formal and informal surveying of our employees. We just did a big employee survey where we're asking people how they feel about working from home and coming back to the office, that sort of thing. But the teams generally do that a lot too in their weekly meetings and that kind of thing to just check in with folks and see, how are we doing? How's our productivity levels doing? Is the engagement on the events that we're having, the virtual happy hours and that kind of thing to check in and see if we are getting to people, even though we can't actually physically be there with them.
When I want to really know how someone's doing, I'm picking up the phone and calling them. I feel like there's this need to be on and this presentation of self that's happening on the camera. And I feel like I'm getting much more honest conversations just by phone, not forcing them to be on a camera and looking at me and then suddenly to put on a brave face and no, I'm fine, everything's good. And I'm just getting more out of the phone. And then just randomly not scheduling a time, just calling them up, seeing how they're doing. That seems to be working pretty well.
Brynn just brought that up, and she said if there's Zoom fatigue, Brynn said if there's Zoom fatigue, we should all switch to phone calls. I was like, oh, it's a horrible idea. There you go. It's clearly working. So, Brynn, Point taken.
I pointed out that conference calls used to be the norm, right? And now it's Zoom calls. I'm like, well, why don't we just switch back to phones? Because for me, it's important for people to physically stand up and move during the day. If you have a lot of meetings, you might not get up for 6 hours, and that is not good on your physical or your mental health. So I've actually, to your point, Margaret, for a lot of my one-on-one meetings, I've started doing them on the phone and encourage people like walk around the block while we're talking just to get out and get some fresh air.
I know I had to have a conversation with my assistant because everything suddenly was a Zoom meeting. And I said, let's set some guidelines. If pre-COVID, this would have been an in-person meeting, it's a Zoom. If pre-COVID, it would have been a call, it's a call. I feel like somehow the pendulum swung so far that every single engagement suddenly was a Zoom meeting. I'm like, this does not need to be a Zoom meeting. I don't need to be on camera with this person. Can I just talk to them for 15 minutes? So that kind of became my litmus test, which helped cut out about, I'd say 20 or 30% of them.
Great ideas. Thank you. Allison, how does a large company track employee morale? Or is it really, it's decentralized and pushed down to, VPs and leaders and managers? Or is it systemic, knowing you're in so many locations when you're allowed to be in locations? Like, how do you track and manage morale?
Yeah, so I think there's a little bit of both. At the sort of local level, like I keep in touch with my team, whether it's via those happy hours or I can tell, I think the benefit of having been with mostly the same people on my team for at least, I don't know, a year and a half or so, you get to know people and you can kind of hear in their voices if they're sort of touchy or if they just sound off or not right. I think I've noticed too a lot that because there's such a loss of control of so many things happening in the world that people are just sort of clutching onto work with both hands and doing things that they might not have normally done try hard to pay attention to what people sound like and what are they doing that might not follow the norm for that person, and then just talk to them. But it is hard. I think at a higher level, we've had way more communication from the top of Fidelity in the form of videos. So we have seen our CEO basically every week since this started on video, which has been really great because, we used to hear from her a lot, but never in video. So to see her in her office, her home office, and our head of HR in his home office, and, I think the videos have really helped. So from a higher level, I think that's helping with morale. And then lower level, it just helps to know your people and listen more closely, I guess.
So Allison, I agree that there's this desire to what can you control in your work, and some people are leaning into work. And again, I don't have data, but my sense is that a lot of people are so grateful that they still have their job, and that unemployment has impacted them in personal ways. Everyone has a family member or a very close friend that has been laid off. And so it'll be interesting to see how that dynamic is going to play out depending on, what the unemployment levels stay at. And is there going to be this new loyalty to employer or something for the next few years? I don't know. There aren't any data on it yet, but I think something's going to happen there.
Yeah.
It really is extraordinary. We went from a 50-year low of unemployment to an 80-year high in 20 days. It's extraordinary change. And I don't think that sentiment can change that quickly, for the long term, but it's going to be very interesting to see how it plays out. So we've talked about sort of the emotional downside. What about the emotional upside? I've realized I'm someone who uses drinking, and I mean not just wine, but coffee, tea. It is a very important ritual of celebration for me to be in the office and say, let's go out of the office and I'll toast you with whatever we're drinking. But it is a way that I'm signaling celebration or recognition or caring. And virtual happy hours just aren't cutting it for me. So does anyone have some tips about how to really celebrate as a group, when we're remote? Has anything worked well? I mean, Allison, I love your idea about just gathering to talk not about work, but are there ways that are specifically meaningful for celebrating work milestones when it is really hard sometimes for certain people to show up at work to get stuff done? You really want to recognize it. How do you celebrate?
So I don't have a massive team, so this has been economically feasible for me, which may not for large companies, but I've been sending gifts to everyone's house. So one week I sent them all a plant, and then everyone got a different kind of plant. They could show it, or sending them all cupcakes and things like that, so that there's something in their home that they can then share and talk about. And then people make homemade signs or homemade Zoom backgrounds for people's birthdays, and trying to get a little more, feel into it, but it's tough.
Yeah, I don't know that I personally have figured that out. What I have seen is people love a T-shirt, man. If you send you send someone a T-shirt for like at the end of a big project or something, and the whole team gets one. I don't know. It's just it might only be for a couple hours that you get a bump, but yeah, I don't have any big great ideas for that other than, like you said, kind of sending a gift or something to acknowledge whatever it is that got done.
I'll kick it over to Brynn because I'm sure she has stuff because she is on it. She knows everybody's birthday, she knows when people are having good days or bad days. She's one of those people who like knows her team, and she knows people not on her team. But I'll say one of the things she suggested to me is that, we're pretty straight talking to the company right now about what our customers are going through, what the employees of the world are going through. Like, we are trying to not put rose-colored glasses on. And she suggested at the end of every company meeting, I add just with a few good things, always reminding we're making progress. And it literally is a section called, and now a few good things. And you just kind of go like, here are some wins we've had. And even though the state of the world can feel very grave, just having the ritual of going back to the positives. That's how Brynn is sort of coaching me. But what other things have you done, Brynn, to create that recognition, to create that celebration? First of all, you acknowledge it was one of our lessons. What else do you do?
Yeah, I think it's really powerful for folks to know that people know they've accomplished something. So, for example, sometimes I will say to Amanda, hey, this happened. You should say something to this person. And it's a sentence-long email or something similar to that. It costs no money. Obviously, it takes time and coordination. But I think that really matters to employees that are kind of sitting in their apartment working really hard. And then they realize like, oh, the CRO knows I just did this thing. That's very cool. So I've been trying to do a lot more of that, of just saying like, hey, who can I celebrate, or who should I send other people to celebrate, just to do that. The other thing we've had actually a shocking amount of complimentary success with is sending cards. So going back to your thing, Margaret, about sending gifts. Just sending notes to people for their birthday or for some milestone that they've done with work, I think has been really, really helpful. Like, for example, I sent a card to our office that actually arrived today. So our office manager that's checking the mail got a card at the office to her. And so she said something about it. So it's just stuff like that where you have to think through like, where will people be and how can I just take a moment to say, hey, nice job. Just like if you were at the water cooler, you would say like, hey, I hear you got that project done. And then you would move on to your meeting, and that's kind of the end of it,
So I think there's some really interesting themes here about, the CEO of Fidelity is now doing videos to show Abby's showing her face versus just communicating. I mean, lots of very interesting themes here. And it kind of brings me to a broader question of what do we need to unlearn about work? What is this time of being remote really taught us about mindsets and acquired behaviors that will limit future success? Like, what do we tell? I'm with you, Margaret. I thought I had to be out and about because I'm a feminist and a CEO and I'm always hiring. And like, I would be out 15 hours a day, 3 days a week, out and about at community events. And now I'm like, I don't ever need to not have dinner with my family. Again, I don't need to miss a family dinner again. Completely changing the story of what I told myself productivity meant. Anyone else have some other things to share about like behaviors we need to unlearn? The stories we've told ourselves about what productivity is, what work is, that we need to untell ourselves to really thrive now that we've had this collective experience?
I think this compartmentalization is going away, and this expectation of the ideal worker, right? So companies want the ideal worker who's not encumbered by any outside obligations so that they can focus all their efforts on work, be able to fly 1,000 miles on a moment's notice and drop everything and get to a client. And that was working for some people and not working for others. We know all of the barriers for women, advancing more quickly in the workplace because they are disproportionately responsible for things at home and can't always be the ideal worker. And I think the expectations of the ideal worker are slowly dissolving through this. And if we could really break it down, it could be the great equalizer, because this humanizing that you all are talking about, this realization that people have messy lives at home, and it's been so compartmentalized until now. I don't want to see it. Don't talk to me about it. I'll give you some flex time to handle it, but that's not my problem. When you come to work, you need to be focused on work, and then you go home and deal with that stuff. But on the flip side, employees are struggling setting boundaries because of this looking at it. So I think we still have some work to do, but I think there's tremendous opportunity here to actually create what we said we all have been wanting, and we're being forced into it. There are many ways that COVID is the great accelerator, and this is one of them.
Love it. Thank you, Margaret. Brynn, what do we have to unlearn about work?
I think FaceTime matters, but it's a different type of FaceTime. Right? So kind of a little bit piggybacking what you're saying, Margaret, like expecting that people need to be in the office certain hours to get and to attend certain meetings and that kind of thing doesn't matter. Your FaceTime matters because you need to show up and you need to be at work, but it doesn't mean that you can't leave at 3:30 to get to your kid's soccer game. And I think that this has forced some trust on employees that a lot of organizations didn't have before, that they will be there when it really matters, and they won't be when it doesn't because something else is taking priority, and that's okay. So I think it's rebalancing what that means and whether or not it's truly critical that you are in one place at a particular time or in another place at a particular time.
Yeah, so I think that something we need to unlearn. It's sort of similar to what you were saying, Margaret, but that there's this sort of division between what happens outside of work and what happens in work, and that you shouldn't talk about those things at work. So, for example, with all the protests and around George Floyd and all of the Black people in the U.S. who have died, we made a conscious choice. Okay, we need to talk about this. Like this, we can't just act like this isn't happening. And I think part of the reason why that felt weird is because for so long you're sort of taught like you sort of keep those things outside of work. But knowing what we know about how much what's going on in people's lives impacts their work lives as well, it's just I think that's something we definitely need to unlearn, that people need to talk about what's going on inside the walls of work too.
That was one of I think the toughest things as I've talked to fellow CEOs is that you realize that for some of your people, your employees, when you think about like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, the most basic need of safety isn't being met.
Right.
And how on earth do you deal with that when you're thinking about advancement and fulfillment and reward? And they're like, no, 1.0, safety. I don't feel safe. And just the gravity of that, it's like you have to just talk about it and kind of like muddle into the discomfort and be like, the only way out is through. And it is unbelievably high EQ conversations have had to happen because of this confluence of events where there is not an answer and there is not a playbook, and it's humanity in its messiest for sure in the workplace. Yeah, thank you. I'll think more about that in the weeks to come. So, sort of final speed round, ladies. If you had to write the definitive book describing the future of work post-pandemic, what would the title be?
I'll say we got everything we said we wanted. Now what? Because we said we wanted digital transformation. We got it overnight. The younger workers said they want more flexibility. They want to be able to work from home. They got it. I mean, all these things we said we wanted that was going to make the work-life balance better, it's here. But is everyone actually happier and more engaged? So what is it? What's it going to take? Now what? So that's how I'm feeling right now.
Awesome. Thank you. Brynn.
Similar vein, we've been doing it wrong.
I would say the rise and demise of open workspaces, because we we had such a huge transition in all of our buildings to sort of unassigned seating and no walls and collaboration, and now when we're trying to figure out how to go back to the office, that is the very thing that's sort of causing the biggest problems.
Not popular is
No.
what we're hearing from our people. Not popular. And now potentially like every sort of employee engagement and morale thing I put into place, like the idea of one coffee pot to force interactions, it's now physically endangering employees. So yeah,
Right.
we're taking our playbook and kicking it to the curb and really trying to figure out what it means to have an office and what role it plays and how people gather and to do all of that, you know, around productivity and engagement while fundamentally keeping people safe. So very interesting times. Margaret, Allison, Brynn, thank you so much for making time. Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom and perspective. This was really amazing, and I'm very, very grateful. Thank you.
Thank
You're welcome.
you.
Thank
Thank you.
you.